I slammed on the brakes in my driveway, heart pounding in disbelief. Hit the garage opener. It screeched and jammed halfway. Two massive, filthy trucks crammed inside my garage. Diesel fumes burning my lungs, oil staining my floor. Rage exploded inside me. This was pure home invasion. There she stood, blocking my spot. Delilah, the infamous HOA vice president, clipboard like a weapon, smug smile dripping arrogance.
What the hell are your trucks doing in my garage?
I roared, voice shaking with fury. Emergency protocol, she sneered.
I have the master keys for the good of the community.
One truck flaunted HOA board member, the other her husband's beast. They'd invaded while I was gone, then handed me a violation notice. This power-drunk Karen declared war on the wrong person. The brutal takedown that followed, chaos and delicious justice. Her meltdown was priceless. What would you do? Drop your wildest HOA horror in the comments. And where are you watching from? Let me tell you who made the biggest mistake of her HOA career. I'm Ezra Caldwell, 52 years old, third-generation machinist who bleeds motor oil and American steel. For 12 hours a day, I craft precision aerospace parts that keep fighter jets in the sky. My hands are scarred from decades of honest work, calloused from gripping tools that most people can't even pronounce. When my beloved Aunt Millicent passed 6 months ago, she left me her modest 1960s ranch house in Maplewood Heights, what I thought was a quiet subdivision where neighbors waved and minded their own damn business. My house sits on a corner lot with a detached single-car garage that barely fits my pride and joy. My father's restored 1985 Chevy pickup. That truck represents 3 generations of Caldwell sweat equity. Every bolt, every wire, every drop of paint applied with reverence. But I wasn't the only one eyeing that garage. Delilah Thornberry, the self-appointed dictator of suburbia, had been circling my property like a vulture for months. This woman considers herself the sheriff of our subdivision. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, manicured nails that have never touched actual work, and a Mercedes SUV that costs more than my annual salary. For 8 years, she's terrorized this neighborhood as HOA vice president, measuring grass with rulers and photographing violations like she's building criminal cases. Her husband owns Thornberry Construction. Convenient, right? Every violation notice comes with a recommendation for their correction services. 3 weeks ago, the city announced street resurfacing. Normal people would ask neighbors politely for parking help, not Princess Delilah. She designated her cronies' driveways as priority zones while declaring my garage emergency overflow parking for community vehicles, without permission, without notification, without a single word to the actual owner. The musty smell of old cardboard boxes filled my nostrils as I searched through Aunt Millicent's stored paperwork that evening, looking for anything that might help my case. The rough texture of decades-old documents felt substantial between my fingers as I dug deeper. Then I found it. Buried beneath Christmas cards and recipe clippings, the original 1962 subdivision deed. My hands trembled as I unfolded that yellowed document. According to the original surveyor's measurements, my corner lot included 15 feet of land the HOA had been claiming as common area for 60 years. The community garden, the entrance fountain, even part of the community center where Delilah held her little tribunals, built on my land. Delilah thought she was stealing my garage. She had no idea I owned half her kingdom. Word count, 448, 650, need expansion. The implications hit me like a lightning bolt. Every monthly HOA assessment for landscape maintenance, theft of services for work performed on my property, every board meeting held to enforce their authority, conducted on land they never owned. But the beautiful part was the timing. While those trucks sat locked in my garage, I now had the legal ammunition to destroy her entire operation. Delilah assumed she was dealing with another pushover homeowner who'd quietly pay fines and follow orders. She'd done zero research on the machinist who doesn't just fix problems. He engineers solutions. The distant hum of road construction equipment down the street seemed to mock her emergency as I studied that deed by lamplight. The acrid smell of fresh printer ink from her violation notice mixed with the diesel fumes still lingering in my garage. Tomorrow I'd file those trespassing charges. But tonight I was planning something much bigger. Princess Delilah had picked the wrong property to steal, and she was about to discover that her entire empire was built on land that belonged to me. The next morning, I had police officers, a tow truck, and the smuggest HOA Karen in history all converging on my driveway. "Officers, this man has illegally imprisoned our vehicles," Delilah shrieked, pointing at my locked garage like I'd committed a federal crime. "He's holding community property hostage." The lead officer, a weathered veteran who looked like he'd dealt with suburban drama before, examined my garage door and the trucks visible through the windows. "Ma'am, these vehicles are parked on his private property. That's trespassing." "Trespassing?" Delilah's voice hit a pitch that could shatter glass. "This was emergency parking authorized under HOA bylaws." I handed the officer copies of my property deed and HOA regulations. "Officer, there's no emergency parking clause that allows seizure of private garages, and I never consented to any vehicle storage." While Delilah sputtered protests, I called my discovery. "Furthermore, I've discovered that this woman's been claiming ownership of property that legally belongs to me for 60 years. I produced the 1962 subdivision deed, yellow with age but crystal clear in its measurements. This original survey shows my property line extends 15 feet into what the HOA calls common area. Her husband's construction company has been billing the HOA for maintenance on my land." The officer's eyebrows shot up as he compared the original deed to current property maps. Even Delilah's bluster faltered as she realized what I was holding. That document is outdated," she stammered. "Boundaries change over time through adverse possession. Adverse possession requires hostile, open use without the owner's consent," I interrupted, remembering my father's property law lessons. "When boundaries are simply surveyed wrong, the original deed stands." The metallic taste of victory filled my mouth as I watched Delilah's confidence crumble. "Officer, I'm filing formal trespassing charges against Mrs. Thornberry for unauthorized use of my garage and demanding immediate removal of these vehicles." "You can't do this!" Delilah's perfect composure finally cracked. "I'm the HOA vice president. I have authority." "Not over my property, you don't." The tow truck operator, a grizzled guy who'd clearly seen this type of neighborhood drama before, scratched his head. "Lady, if the man wants the trucks gone, I gotta remove 'em. That's how property rights work." As those trucks got winched out of my garage, the sound of metal scraping concrete was like music to my ears. Each screech and groan represented another piece of Delilah's authority being stripped away. "This isn't over," she hissed, climbing into her Mercedes. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Actually," I called out, waving the 1962 deed, "I know exactly who I'm messing with. Someone who's been trespassing on my land for 8 years. Her tires squealed as she fled, leaving behind the acrid smell of burning rubber and the sweet satisfaction of justice served. But I knew this was just the opening salvo. Delilah's real escalation was coming, and I was ready for it. That afternoon brought the first wave of her retaliation. A certified letter from Thornberry Legal Services demanding $5,000 for illegal detention of commercial vehicles and interference with emergency community operations. The letter felt official between my fingers, heavy paper with embossed letterhead, but something about the legal language seemed off. I called the State Bar Association. "Thornberry Legal Services? No law firm registered under that name," the clerk informed me. "Sounds like someone's practicing law without a license." Another felony to add to Delilah's growing pile. But her real masterstroke came that evening. I returned from my shift to find a work crew installing no parking signs along the disputed 15-foot strip of my property. Not HOA maintenance workers, Thornberry construction employees working without permits on land they didn't own. I documented everything with photos while calling the county code enforcement office. The smell of wet concrete and fresh paint filled the air as these idiots literally provided evidence of their trespass in real time. "You're trespassing," I informed the crew supervisor, a nervous kid who clearly hadn't been told about the property dispute. "Ma'am said it was HOA common area," he mumbled, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Ma'am lied. This is private property under active legal dispute and you're destroying evidence." By the time code enforcement arrived, Delilah's crew had installed 3 concrete signposts and a decorative border fence, all on my land, all without permits, all documented in crystal clear photographs. The code officer whistled low as he surveyed the unauthorized construction. "Lady's got brass, I'll give her that. Installing permanent improvements on disputed property during active litigation? That's bold. Is it legal? Hell no. This is destruction of evidence and trespass to land, plus unpermitted construction in a residential zone. He started writing citations faster than Delilah issued violations. Your HOA lady just racked up about $15,000 in fines. The rough texture of those fresh violation notices felt satisfying as I watched Delilah's operation implode. Every desperate move created more evidence of her criminal conspiracy. She thought locking those trucks in my garage was an inconvenience. She had no idea it was the first domino in a chain reaction that would destroy her completely. Delilah's next move was pure desperation disguised as authority, and it backfired spectacularly. She organized an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss my hostile actions against community safety. The notice, printed on cheap copy paper that felt rough between my fingers, declared my garage locking an act of aggression against community welfare. I arrived at the community center 30 minutes early with a surprise that made Delilah's face go white, a professional surveyor, my real estate attorney, and Jessica Martinez from Channel 7 News. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced before Delilah could call her kangaroo court to order, I have information that changes everything you think you know about this HOA. The surveyor unrolled his equipment while my attorney addressed the crowd. Before this meeting begins, you should know that this building sits partially on property illegally claimed by your HOA. Mr. Caldwell owns 15 feet of land you've been calling common area for 60 years. Gasps rippled through the room as residents realized the implications. The entrance fountain, community garden, even the meeting hall itself, all built on stolen land. That's preposterous, Delilah shrieked, her clipboard rattling and shaking hands. Those boundaries were established decades ago by incorrect surveys that never checked the original 1962 deed, my attorney replied calmly. Original property deeds supersede all subsequent surveys. Your HOA has been committing systematic trespass for 6 decades. I pulled out the yellowed subdivision deed, its musty smell filling the room as I unfolded 60 years of lies. Every monthly assessment you've collected for landscape maintenance, theft of services for work performed on my property. The visual impact was devastating. Residents could see exactly what had been stolen. Their monthly fees funding improvements on land the HOA never owned. But Jessica Martinez delivered the killing blow. Mrs. Thornberry, Channel 7 has obtained financial records showing your husband's construction company received over $200,000 in HOA contracts for work performed on Mr. Caldwell's property. Can you explain this apparent fraud? Delilah's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. The perfect suburban queen was disintegrating in real time on camera. Furthermore, my attorney continued, Mrs. Thornberry's installation of unauthorized improvements on disputed property yesterday constitutes willful destruction of evidence in an active legal case. The district attorney has agreed to pursue criminal charges. That's when Delilah completely snapped. This is a conspiracy, she screamed, pointing at me with trembling fingers. You locked our trucks in your garage like some kind of criminal. You're destroying our community with lies and manipulation. The irony was delicious. She was having her meltdown in a building that sat on my property, accusing me of the crimes she'd been committing for years. Delilah, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like precision-machined steel. I didn't destroy your community. I exposed your crimes. I turned to face the residents who'd suffered under her tyranny for years. Every violation notice, every fine, every threat, all based on authority over land she never owned. This woman has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as community service. The room erupted in applause that shook the walls. Neighbors who'd been terrorized in silence were finally witnessing their oppressor's downfall. The trespassing charges I filed this morning are just the beginning, I continued. Property fraud, embezzlement, practicing law without a license, unpermitted construction. Mrs. Thornberry has built quite a case against herself. As the crowd dispersed, Delilah sat alone at her board table, surrounded by the wreckage of her authority. Her kingdom was crumbling, and everyone could see the emperor had no clothes. The metallic taste of complete victory filled my mouth as I watched the woman who'd tried to steal my garage realize she'd stolen her own destruction instead. But the beautiful part was just beginning. As residents filed out, 3 different neighbors approached me with evidence I'd never expected. Mrs. Rory handed me a folder thick with documentation. Delilah tried the same property grab on my flower bed 2 years ago. Said it was community beautification, but I kept all the paperwork. Mr. Rodriguez showed me photos of Thornberry construction trucks using his cul-de-sac for equipment storage without permission. She told us it was temporary, but they've been doing it for months. Mike, the contractor who'd been blacklisted for refusing to inflate estimates, revealed the smoking gun. She keeps a priority list of contractors who split their profits with Thornberry Construction. Pay to play, pure and simple. Each piece of evidence felt substantial in my hands, building an unbreakable case against Delilah's criminal operation. The rough texture of photocopied invoices, the smooth surface of digital photos, the crisp edges of official correspondence, all documenting years of systematic fraud. Jessica Martinez's eyes lit up as she reviewed the mountain of evidence. This isn't just HOA harassment. This is organized racketeering. The story just got 10 times bigger. By the time I locked my garage that night, I wasn't just protecting my property from one trespassing incident. I was the catalyst that exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been bleeding our neighborhood dry for years. Delilah thought she could intimidate me into submission by parking her trucks in my garage. Instead, she'd awakened a machinist who understood that the best defense is overwhelming offense. The war was far from over, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Delilah's final desperate gambit was more spectacular than I could have imagined, and it sealed her fate completely. 3 days after her public humiliation, I woke to the sound of diesel engines and hydraulic equipment outside my window. Through my bedroom curtains, I watched a convoy of Thornberry construction vehicles rolling into the subdivision like an occupying army. The smell of exhaust fumes and hot metal drifted through my open window as I counted the invasion force: 2 dump trucks, a backhoe, and a flatbed trailer loaded with concrete barriers. My phone buzzed with a text that made my blood boil. Emergency restoration of community property begins today. Remain clear of work zones for safety. HOA Emergency Response Team. I threw on clothes and rushed outside to find Delilah orchestrating what looked like a military operation. She wore a hard hat and reflective vest, clipboard in hand, directing workers like some kind of construction general. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my boots crunching on gravel as I approached. "Emergency restoration of community landscaping damaged by your illegal surveying activities," she replied without looking up. "We're installing permanent security barriers to prevent further vandalism." The audacity was breathtaking. She was trying to install concrete barriers on my 15-foot strip to block access to the disputed land permanently. "You can't install anything on property under active litigation." "There is no disputed property. The HOA board voted unanimously last night to proceed with emergency restoration under crisis management protocols." But here's where Delilah made her fatal mistake. She'd learned nothing from having her trucks locked in my garage. I immediately called my attorney, who nearly exploded through the phone. "They're doing what? That's destruction of evidence in an active court case." Next call, the police. "Officers, I have people installing permanent structures on my property without permission during active litigation." The backhoe started digging trenches for concrete footings, each scoop destroying more evidence while my security cameras recorded every second of this spectacular self-destruction. When police arrived, Delilah produced another thick folder of manufactured authority. "Officers, we're simply restoring community property damaged by Mr. Caldwell's frivolous surveying activities." The lead officer examined her paperwork while I showed him my court filings and the original 1962 deed. But then Delilah made the mistake that ended everything. "Officer, I should mention that Mr. Caldwell has been making terroristic threats against board members," she announced, handing over copies of her defamatory flyers. "We're concerned about escalating violence." The officer took her documents, but his expression shifted. Something felt wrong about her presentation. "Ma'am, if you have evidence of terroristic threats, why wasn't this reported through proper channels?" "We wanted to handle it internally first." "Terroristic threats aren't handled internally. They're felonies requiring immediate police action." I watched Delilah's confidence crumble in real time as her lies collapsed under professional scrutiny. "Officer," I said calmly, "those threats were me demanding she remove trucks from my garage. I have security footage of every interaction." "You have security footage of alleged terroristic threats?" "Hours of it, including footage from last week showing her husband destroying survey markers with a crowbar." But yeah, that's when everything went sideways for Princess Delilah. Her husband, apparently unaware of the police presence, chose that moment to scream at his crew about getting those fucking stakes out of the ground before anyone sees them. His voice carried across the construction site like a confession broadcast over loudspeakers. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut is one of the most beautiful noises in the world. As they led both Thornberrys away for evidence tampering, destruction of property, and filing false police reports, Delilah made one final desperate plea. "You're making a terrible mistake. This man has manipulated everyone into destroying respected community leaders." But the damage was done. Her emergency restoration project had become a crime scene. The concrete barriers she'd tried to install sat abandoned like monuments to her stupidity. I stood in my driveway that afternoon, surrounded by police tape and evidence markers, holding the keys to my garage where this whole beautiful disaster had started. Delilah thought she could steal my parking space and intimidate me into submission. Instead, she'd triggered a chain reaction that exposed decades of fraud and landed her in county jail. The Queen's final gambit had backfired so spectacularly that she literally arrested herself. That evening, as news vans filled our subdivision and neighbors celebrated in the streets, I reflected on the beautiful simplicity of it all. When I locked those trucks in my garage, I wasn't just protecting my property. I was forcing a criminal conspiracy into the light. Every escalation Delilah attempted, every desperate move to maintain control, only provided more evidence of her crimes. The rough texture of police reports felt satisfying between my fingers as officers documented the wreckage of Delilah's operation. Unauthorized construction, evidence tampering, false police reports, fraud, the charges kept mounting. Jessica Martinez wrapped up her live broadcast from my driveway with professional satisfaction. What began as a simple parking dispute has exposed systematic HOA corruption that may affect dozens of similar communities across the metro area. The irony was perfect. Delilah's attempt to steal my garage had cost her everything: her freedom, her authority, her husband's business, and her reputation. All because she picked the wrong machinist to mess with. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be a victim. With Delilah and her husband in county jail, the real magnitude of their criminal operation began to unfold like a precision-engineered machine coming apart under stress. The county district attorney's office assigned a financial crimes specialist to investigate the HOA embezzlement scheme. What she discovered made my property boundary issue look like small change. "Mr. Caldwell," Detective Sarah Morrison explained, spreading financial documents across my kitchen table, "this goes far beyond simple trespassing. We're looking at systematic fraud involving multiple HOAs across the county." The papers felt substantial between my fingers. Bank records, invoices, contract documents that painted a picture of organized crime disguised as community service. Thornberry Construction has been running a kickback scheme with at least 12 different HOA boards. They inflate maintenance contracts, split the profits with board members, then use violation enforcement to force homeowners into expensive corrections. The musty smell of old financial records mixed with the fresh ink of newly printed evidence as Detective Morrison laid out the scope of Delilah's operation. "Your property dispute was just the tip of the iceberg. They've been stealing land, inflating assessments, and embezzling maintenance funds for years. Conservative estimate, we're looking at over $2 million in fraud across multiple subdivisions. My garage locking incident had accidentally triggered the collapse of a criminal enterprise that spanned the entire county." The metallic taste of vindication filled my mouth as I realized how perfectly everything had aligned. "But here's the beautiful part," Detective Morrison continued. "Your documentation provided the template for investigating all the other cases. That original 1962 deed you found, it led us to check property records for every subdivision where Thornberry Construction worked." She pulled out a map marked with red pins showing HOA communities across 3 counties. Boundary disputes, illegal assessments, unauthorized improvements, the pattern repeats everywhere they operated. The implications crashed over me like a revelation. I hadn't just beaten one corrupt HOA board, I'd exposed a regional conspiracy that had been bleeding homeowners dry for decades. "Mrs. Thornberry kept meticulous records," Detective Morrison said with professional admiration. "Criminals always think they're too smart to get caught, so they document everything. Her filing cabinets read like a confession." She showed me photocopied invoices where Delilah had literally written notes in the margins: inflate by 40% and add violation penalties to increase urgency. The arrogance was breathtaking. "The federal prosecutor is considering RICO charges. Racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud. This hits every element of organized crime. I sat in my kitchen that evening, surrounded by evidence of a criminal conspiracy that my simple garage door lock had helped destroy. The warm glow of justice felt better than any revenge I could have imagined. My father always taught me that honest work reveals dishonest schemes. By simply refusing to be intimidated, I'd forced Delilah's entire operation into the open where it couldn't survive scrutiny. One more thing, Detective Morrison had said before leaving. The asset forfeiture from this case will fund victim restitution. Every homeowner who paid inflated HOA fees or bogus violation fines will get their money back. Justice wasn't just served. It came with a check in the mail. Word count, 553,600, need minor expansion. The next morning brought news that made the victory even sweeter. The State Attorney General's office announced a statewide HOA fraud investigation using our case as the model. The Maplewood Heights case has revealed systematic vulnerabilities in HOA oversight that may affect hundreds of communities, the press release stated. New legislation will strengthen homeowner protections and require financial transparency for all HOA operations. My locked garage had accidentally triggered the most comprehensive HOA reform in state history. The rough texture of newspaper clippings felt satisfying as I read story after story about similar investigations launching across multiple states. But the personal satisfaction was simpler. I walked out to my garage that morning, the scene of the crime that started everything, and smiled at the oil stains on the concrete where Delilah's trucks had trespassed. Those stains were proof that sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just protect you. It protects everyone. With the Thornberrys in jail and federal investigators seizing their assets, I had a choice: settle for personal victory or ensure this never happened again to anyone else. I chose overwhelming force. My attorney filed a comprehensive civil lawsuit that read like a criminal indictment: fraud, conspiracy, trespass, embezzlement, and violation of civil rights. The legal papers felt substantial in my hands, each page another weapon in the arsenal of justice. We're not just seeking damages, my lawyer explained with barely contained excitement. We're demanding complete financial disclosure of every HOA transaction for the past decade, every contract, every violation, every assessment, all of it subject to court review. But legal action was just the beginning. I was engineering a systematic dismantling of corrupt HOA culture that would protect homeowners for generations. Jessica Martinez and I expanded the media investigation into a 3-part documentary series, Suburban Tyranny: The Hidden Cost of HOA Corruption. Camera crews documented every aspect of the fraud, from forged contracts to inflated assessments to intimidation tactics. The smell of fresh ink filled my garage as we organized evidence boxes that would expose decades of systematic theft. Financial records, property documents, witness statements, everything needed to prosecute not just the Thornberrys, but the entire network of corrupt contractors and complicit board members. I reached out to every homeowner who'd been victimized by Delilah's operation. Mrs. Patterson with her garden gnome persecution, the Johnsons facing bogus parking violations, Mike the contractor blacklisted for refusing kickback schemes. Want to see real justice? I asked each one, spreading the evidence across their kitchen tables like a prosecutor building a case. We're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. The reactions were priceless. Stunned silence followed by explosive determination as neighbors realized their suffering had contributed to a criminal conspiracy that spanned multiple counties. Within a week, I had 37 households ready to testify and hungry for accountability. Each family brought their own documentation of harassment, creating an avalanche of evidence that buried any hope of plea bargains. But my masterstroke was the community organizing. I established the Homeowner Rights Coalition, a legal defense fund and advocacy group that would monitor HOA abuse across the region. Prevention is better than prosecution, I explained to our first organizational meeting in my garage. We're going to teach homeowners their rights before they need lawyers to defend them. The coalition grew from 12 founding members to over 200 participants in 6 weeks. Property attorneys volunteered pro bono services. Accountants offered free HOA financial audits. Investigative journalists provided media support for future cases. My garage became mission control for a grassroots movement that transformed individual grievances into systematic reform. The familiar smell of motor oil mixed with the scent of change as we manufactured justice with the same precision I brought to aerospace parts. The technical strategy was mathematical in its elegance. Document everything, know the law, build overwhelming evidence, force transparency, create accountability. When criminals operate in darkness, you don't just turn on the lights, you install permanent illumination that prevents future crimes. I contacted the state legislature with a comprehensive HOA reform package, mandatory financial audits, homeowner bill of rights, criminal penalties for board corruption, and oversight authority for state prosecutors. The Maplewood Heights case proves that HOA abuse is systematic, not isolated, I testified before the State Housing Committee. We need structural reforms that protect homeowners' constitutional rights. My father always taught me that good work outlasts the worker. By building permanent protections instead of just seeking personal vindication, I was ensuring that future families wouldn't face the harassment that destroyed my elderly aunt's peace of mind. The beauty was in the scope. What started with locked trucks in my garage was becoming a statewide movement that would redefine how HOAs operate and how homeowners protect themselves. Delilah thought she could intimidate one factory worker into submission. She accidentally triggered a revolution that would protect thousands of families from suburban tyranny. Word count, 681,800, need expansion for complete strategy. The coalition's first major victory came faster than expected. Using our documentation methods, residents in Oakwood Estates exposed their own corruption scheme involving illegal assessments and contractor kickbacks. Your template worked perfectly, reported coalition member Sarah Rory, whose HOA board had been embezzling landscape funds. Document, investigate, organize, prosecute. Systematic approach for systematic problems. Each success story felt like another piece of precision machinery clicking into place. Coalition members were using our proven strategies to expose corruption in subdivisions across 3 counties. The State Housing Committee fast-tracked our reform legislation after seeing the evidence we'd compiled. The Caldwell Coalition, as media started calling us, had become the gold standard for HOA accountability. But the personal satisfaction remained simple. I could park in my garage without fear, knowing that my locked door had opened opportunities for justice that would protect families for generations. Sometimes the best revenge is making sure the crime can't happen again. Federal prosecutors don't mess around when organized crime hides behind suburban respectability, and watching them dismantle Delilah's operation was better than any revenge I could have engineered. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit arrived at our subdivision with the efficiency of a precision military operation. 3 black SUVs, a mobile forensics lab, and enough search warrants to seize everything the Thornberrys had touched in the past decade. I watched from my garage, the sacred ground where this beautiful destruction began, as agents carried out box after box of evidence from Delilah's former mansion. Mr. Caldwell? Agent Patricia Wells approached with a stack of documents that smelled like fresh printer ink. We need to verify some details about your property boundary dispute. She spread aerial photographs across my workbench, each image marked with measurements and annotations. Your garage incident was the thread that unraveled the entire conspiracy. When we started investigating your property claim, we discovered systematic fraud involving 18 HOA communities. The scope was breathtaking. The metallic taste of complete vindication filled my mouth as I realized how perfectly my simple door lock had triggered this massive investigation. Mrs. Thornberry kept detailed records of every illegal transaction, Agent Wells explained with professional admiration. Criminals always think they're too smart to get caught, so they document everything. Her files read like a confession. She showed me photocopied invoices where Delilah had written margin notes, inflate by 40%, and add urgency penalties. The arrogance was stunning. Racketeering, conspiracy, mail fraud, money laundering. This hits every element of federal organized crime statutes. We're looking at 20-year sentences. But the real escalation came when Delilah's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of my aggressive retaliation for the garage incident. Your Honor, the lawyer argued during her bail hearing, Mr. Caldwell locked my client's vehicles in his garage, then launched a vindictive campaign of harassment designed to destroy her reputation and business. The federal prosecutor's response was swift and devastating. Your Honor, Mrs. Thornberry committed felony trespassing by placing vehicles in Mr. Caldwell's garage without permission. His decision to secure his own property triggered an investigation that revealed systematic fraud affecting over 2,000 homeowners and involving more than $3 million in stolen assets. The judge's expression darkened as prosecutors presented evidence of the broader conspiracy. Mrs. Thornberry, your garage incident appears to be one small element in a massive criminal enterprise. Bail is denied pending federal trial. Watching Delilah led away in handcuffs felt like watching justice in its purest form. The woman who'd tried to steal my garage was now facing federal prison for crimes my locked door had exposed. But her escalation wasn't finished. From county jail, she somehow arranged for a private investigator to contact my neighbors, my employer, and my family with claims that I was unstable and dangerous. The PI's questions were designed to manufacture evidence of mental illness or violent tendencies that could undermine my credibility as the primary witness against her operation. Big mistake. My supervisor at the aerospace facility was a former Marine who dealt with real dangerous people. When some sleazy private investigator suggested I was unstable, the response was immediate and definitive. Anyone who thinks Ezra Caldwell is dangerous has never met actually dangerous people, my supervisor told the FBI agents investigating witness intimidation. If you want dangerous, try threatening a decorated machinist who builds components for fighter jets. The witness intimidation charges added another 5 years to Delilah's potential sentence, while providing more evidence of her consciousness of guilt. Each desperate move created more federal crimes while burning her remaining support. Delilah's attempt to destroy my credibility had backfired into additional felony charges. The beautiful irony reached its peak when federal asset forfeiture procedures seized Delilah's mansion, the same house where she'd plotted to steal my garage. Criminal proceeds are subject to government seizure, Agent Wells explained as movers carried out Delilah's furniture. The house, cars, jewelry, everything purchased with fraud proceeds gets liquidated for victim restitution. I stood in my driveway watching the Queen's Palace being emptied, thinking about how perfectly everything had aligned. Delilah's attempt to park in my garage had cost her everything she'd ever stolen. The mansion went up for auction with a starting bid of $200,000, far below its actual value because of the criminal forfeiture proceedings. A young family bought it and immediately ripped out Delilah's pretentious landscaping, installing a simple playground where their kids could laugh without fear of violation notices. Where tyranny once ruled from a throne of stolen wealth, children's laughter now filled the air. The federal prosecutor called me that evening with news that made the victory complete. Mrs. Thornberry's defense team contacted us about a plea agreement. She's looking at 20 years federal prison, but they want to negotiate. What's the offer? Full cooperation, complete financial disclosure, victim restitution, and 15 years in federal prison. She also has to forfeit all criminal proceeds and agree to lifetime prohibition from HOA board service. The rough texture of justice felt satisfying between my fingers as I held the plea agreement documents. Delilah's garage theft had snowballed into consequences she could never have imagined. Your garage incident triggered the largest HOA fraud prosecution in federal history, the prosecutor continued. The precedent will protect homeowners for generations. I looked out at my garage where 2 trespassing trucks had accidentally exposed a criminal conspiracy worth millions of dollars. Sometimes the best defense is simply refusing to be intimidated. Delilah thought she could steal my parking space and break my will to resist. Instead, she'd broken her own criminal empire against the simple integrity of a locked door. Delilah's final act of desperation from federal custody was more pathetic than I could have imagined, and it sealed her fate with mathematical precision. 3 weeks before her federal trial, she somehow convinced her sister to mortgage her house and hire a high-powered defense firm from the state capitol. The strategy was pure character assassination. Paint me as an unstable vigilante who'd manipulated federal investigators into destroying an innocent community leader. The motion filed by her new legal team read like fiction. Defendant was victimized by plaintiff's campaign of harassment, property manipulation, and false evidence designed to conceal his own criminal violations of HOA regulations. Their theory? I'd fabricated the property boundary dispute, manipulated the 1962 deed, and orchestrated a conspiracy to frame Delilah for crimes I'd committed myself. The audacity was breathtaking. According to her lawyers, locking my garage to prevent trespassing was actually unlawful detention and criminal mischief that proved my unstable mental state. Federal prosecutors called me with barely contained laughter. Mr. Caldwell, They're arguing that your property deed is fake, and you manipulated county surveyors into authenticating forged documents. How's that working out for them? About as well as you'd expect. The original surveyor's records from 1962 are maintained in state archives. Independent verification shows your deed is authentic down to the original surveyor's signature and seal. But Delilah's desperation reached peak insanity when her defense team subpoenaed my employment records, medical records, and financial history, trying to prove I was mentally unfit to own property. That backfired spectacularly. My employment record showed 30 years of precision aerospace work requiring federal security clearance. Medical records confirmed perfect mental health with no history of psychological treatment. Financial records proved I'd never received any payments from competitors, investigators, or anyone else who might benefit from Delilah's downfall. Your background check reads like a federal employment application, my attorney noted with satisfaction. 30 years of security clearance, spotless credit, stable employment, no criminal history. If you're unstable, we need more unstable citizens. But the real destruction came when federal investigators used Delilah's accusations as probable cause to examine her own mental competency and criminal history. Court-ordered psychological evaluation revealed narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial tendencies and delusional beliefs about personal authority and community control. The psychiatrist's report read like a textbook definition of suburban tyranny. Her criminal history investigation uncovered a pattern spanning 2 decades. HOA harassment in 3 different states, contractor kickback schemes in multiple communities, and a previous embezzlement case that had been quietly settled to avoid prosecution. Mrs. Thornberry has been running variations of this fraud for 20 years, Agent Wells informed me during trial preparation. Your garage incident was just her latest victim selection that happened to target someone who fought back. The metallic taste of complete vindication filled my mouth as I realized how perfectly everything had aligned. Delilah wasn't just a corrupt HOA board member. She was a career criminal who specialized in suburban fraud. Her final courtroom performance was worthy of an Academy Award. She sobbed, she screamed, she claimed victimization by a vast conspiracy led by a dangerous machinist who destroyed her life through property manipulation. The federal judge listened with the patience of someone who'd seen every type of criminal defense imaginable. Mrs. Thornberry, the judge finally said, your argument is that Mr. Caldwell somehow forged a 1962 property deed, convinced county surveyors to authenticate fake documents, manipulated federal investigators into pursuing bogus charges, and orchestrated a conspiracy involving multiple law enforcement agencies, all to avoid paying legitimate HOA fines? Yes, Your Honor, he's a dangerous man who... Mrs. Thornberry, that's enough. The judge's voice carried the weight of federal authority. The evidence shows systematic fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering spanning multiple jurisdictions and affecting thousands of victims. Your garage incident was simply the trigger that exposed your criminal enterprise. The gavel's bang echoed through the courtroom like the sound of justice being served. Guilty on all counts. 20 years federal prison, lifetime prohibition from HOA service, and complete forfeiture of criminal proceeds for victim restitution. As federal marshals led Delilah away in chains, she made one final desperate attempt at manipulation. "This isn't justice," she screamed, her voice echoing off courtroom walls. That man destroyed a respected community leader over a simple parking dispute. The irony was perfect. She still didn't understand that her simple parking dispute had exposed decades of organized crime that affected thousands of families. I sat in that federal courtroom, surrounded by the 37 homeowners who'd testified about her harassment campaign, watching the woman who'd tried to steal my garage finally face accountability for crimes spanning 2 decades. The rough texture of the sentencing documents felt satisfying between my fingers as I realized the scope of what that locked garage door had accomplished. Not just personal justice, but systematic reform that would protect future generations from suburban tyranny. Federal asset forfeiture had recovered over $3.2 million for victim restitution. New state legislation required financial transparency and criminal background checks for all HOA board members. The Caldwell Coalition had grown into a regional homeowner advocacy organization with legal resources to fight future corruption. But the sweetest victory was simpler than any legal precedent or media attention. That evening, I parked my father's restored 1985 Chevy pickup in my garage, the same garage where Delilah's trespassing trucks had accidentally triggered her complete destruction. The familiar smell of motor oil and honest work filled the space where this beautiful justice had begun. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be intimidated. And sometimes, when you stand up to one bully, you accidentally save thousands of people from similar bullies who thought they could steal with impunity. Delilah thought she could park in my garage and intimidate me into submission. Instead, she'd parked herself in federal prison for 20 years. The Queen was dead. Long live property rights. The day Delilah's federal conviction became final, our subdivision held the most satisfying block party in HOA history, and the whole thing was broadcast live on Channel 7 News. I stood in my garage, ground zero for the beautiful destruction of suburban tyranny, surrounded by neighbors who'd suffered under Delilah's reign for years. The smell of barbecue smoke mixed with motor oil created the perfect aroma of freedom. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jessica Martinez announced to her television audience, "we're broadcasting live from Maplewood Heights, where a simple parking dispute triggered the largest HOA fraud prosecution in federal history." The visual impact was stunning. My garage door stood wide open, displaying the exact spot where two trespassing trucks had accidentally exposed a criminal conspiracy worth millions of dollars. 18 months ago, Ezra Caldwell came home to find HOA vehicles illegally parked in his private garage, Jessica continued, microphone in hand, as camera crews captured every moment. His decision to lock those trucks inside until police arrived triggered federal investigations that revealed systematic fraud affecting over 2,000 homeowners across 3 counties. The crowd erupted in applause that echoed off garage walls where justice had been born. Mrs. Patterson held her rescued garden gnomes like victory trophies. The Johnsons parked their classic cars in their driveway without fear of bogus violations. But the real climax came when federal prosecutors arrived with the final piece of evidence that would change homeowner protection forever. "Mr. Caldwell," Assistant U.S. Attorney Sandra Williams announced, unrolling a massive display chart, "the Thornberry conspiracy involved fraudulent property claims in 47 HOA communities. Your original property deed discovery led us to investigate boundary disputes nationwide." The chart showed a map of the United States marked with red pins indicating similar fraud cases. Federal task forces are now investigating HOA corruption in 12 states using investigation techniques developed from your case. I looked out at faces in the crowd, neighbors who'd been terrorized by petty tyrants, families who'd paid inflated fees to criminal contractors, elderly residents who'd been intimidated into silence. "This isn't just about one corrupt HOA board," I announced, my voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd engineered complete victory. "This is about constitutional property rights and the rule of law defeating organized crime disguised as community service." The applause built to thunder that shook windows throughout the subdivision. "Delilah Thornberry thought she could steal my garage and intimidate me into submission," I continued, gesturing toward the concrete floor where her trucks had trespassed. "Instead, she accidentally exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been stealing from homeowners for decades." But the mic drop moment came when I announced the final surprise. The federal asset forfeiture from this case has recovered $3.2 million for victim restitution, I said, pulling out a stack of official documents. "Every homeowner who paid inflated HOA fees or bogus violation fines will receive full compensation plus interest." The crowd erupted in celebration that could be heard 3 blocks away. Justice hadn't just been served, it came with checks in the mail. "Furthermore," I continued, "the Caldwell Coalition has established a permanent legal defense fund to protect homeowners from future HOA abuse. Any family facing harassment can access free legal resources developed from our case." Jessica Martinez stepped forward with her microphone, capturing the moment for television history. "Mr. Caldwell, what message do you have for other homeowners facing HOA harassment?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking about families across the country who might be watching this broadcast while suffering under their own suburban tyrants. "Document everything. Know your rights. Never let anyone steal your peace of mind in your own home." I paused, tasting the metallic satisfaction of complete victory. Property rights aren't suggestions. They're constitutional protections, and bullies only have the power you give them. The camera captured neighbors hugging, children playing on equipment funded by recovered embezzlement money, and families celebrating in the shadow of Delilah's former mansion, where new owners had installed a simple swing set. Where tyranny once ruled from a throne of stolen wealth, freedom now filled the air with the sound of community cooperation. Word count, 689,800. Need expansion for complete climax. As the celebration continued into the evening, I reflected on the beautiful simplicity of what that locked garage door had accomplished. Federal prison sentences for career criminals, millions of dollars recovered for fraud victims, legislative reform protecting homeowners nationwide, a regional advocacy organization providing legal resources for future cases, all triggered by my refusal to let 2 trucks steal my parking space. The rough texture of victim restitution checks felt satisfying as I helped distribute recovered funds to neighbors who'd suffered under Delilah's operation. Each check represented validation that their suffering hadn't been ignored or forgotten. "You know what the best part is?" Mrs. Patterson asked, clutching her restitution check while her rescued garden gnome stood guard in her front yard. She thought we were just isolated victims who'd never fight back. "But we weren't isolated," added Mr. Rodriguez, whose cul-de-sac was finally free from unauthorized equipment storage. "We just needed someone to show us how to organize and fight." Mike the contractor raised his beer in a toast that summarized everything perfectly. "To Ezra Caldwell, the man who locked a garage door and accidentally liberated an entire region from suburban tyranny." The applause continued as television crews captured the celebration for national broadcast. My simple act of property protection had become a template for homeowner resistance that would inspire similar victories across the country. But the sweetest moment came when a young family approached with their toddler daughter. "Mr. Caldwell," the mother said, "we just moved into Mrs. Thornberry's old house. Our daughter will grow up in a neighborhood where she can play without fear of harassment. Thank you for making that possible." I looked down at that little girl, who would never know the anxiety of living under suburban dictatorship, and realized the true scope of what justice had accomplished. Sometimes standing up to one bully saves thousands of future victims from similar bullies. And sometimes the best revenge is building a world where the crime can't happen again. 2 years later, our subdivision has become a model for what genuine community cooperation looks like when criminals disguised as leaders get replaced by neighbors who actually care about each other. The transformation is visible everywhere you look. Millicent Caldwell Memorial Park, built on the 15 feet of disputed land I donated to the city, hosts our annual Freedom from Tyranny celebration where children play on equipment funded by recovered embezzlement money. Property values increased 23% once word spread that our HOA nightmare was permanently over. Real estate agents specifically market our subdivision as corruption-free community living, where residents enjoy actual self-governance instead of suburban dictatorship. The new HOA board, elected in emergency sessions after Delilah's arrest, operates with radical transparency that makes fraud impossible. Monthly budgets posted online, contractor bidding open to all residents, and financial oversight by an independent auditing firm that prevents future embezzlement. Our monthly HOA fees dropped 40% when legitimate competition replaced the Thornberry monopoly. Turns out that honest contractors charge fair prices when they're not padding invoices to fund kickback schemes. But the personal transformations mean more than any financial recovery or legal precedent. Mrs. Patterson's garden gnome collection has grown to epic proportions, and she now leads neighborhood walking tours that celebrate decorative freedom in our subdivision. Her laughter echoes where Delilah's threats once created silence. The Johnsons converted their driveway into a classic car showcase that draws admiring neighbors every weekend. Their 1967 Mustang gleams with pride where violation notices once threatened daily fines. Mike the contractor started Honest Work Home Services, a neighborhood business that helps elderly residents with maintenance at actual cost instead of the inflated rates Delilah's scheme had demanded. And me? I discovered that fighting suburban tyranny was just the beginning of a much larger mission. The Caldwell Coalition has grown into a regional homeowner advocacy organization with over 3,000 members across 12 states. We provide legal resources, investigation templates, and media support for families facing HOA corruption anywhere in the country. My garage, the sacred ground where this beautiful justice began, now serves as headquarters for training sessions where I teach homeowners the practical skills needed to expose and prosecute similar fraud operations. Document everything, know your rights, build overwhelming evidence, and never let bullies steal your peace, I tell each new group of homeowner advocates. One person standing up to corruption can trigger changes that protect thousands of families. The guidebook I wrote, Locking Down HOA Abuse, a homeowner's legal toolkit, has sold over 150,000 copies and generated enough royalties to fund free legal aid for families who can't afford attorneys but deserve justice. I speak at property rights conferences nationwide, sharing the systematic approach that turned my garage incident into the template for homeowner protection. The message is always the same. Constitutional rights aren't suggestions, and organized crime doesn't get immunity just because it hides behind community service. But my favorite victory happens every time I park my father's 1985 Chevy pickup in the garage where this whole beautiful destruction began. The familiar smell of motor oil mixed with honest work reminds me that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or wealth, but with simple integrity and refusal to be intimidated. Federal prosecutors used our case to develop new guidelines for investigating HOA fraud that have led to prosecutions in 17 states. The Caldwell precedent protects homeowners' constitutional rights while creating criminal penalties severe enough to deter future suburban tyrants. 47 copycat prosecutions across the country have recovered over $23 million for fraud victims while sending the clear message that HOA corruption will face federal consequences. Word count, 590,700. Need expansion for complete resolution. Last month, I received a letter that perfectly captured the scope of what that locked garage door had accomplished. Dear Mr. Caldwell, wrote Maria Santos from Phoenix, Arizona, your story inspired me to investigate our HOA's suspicious landscape contracts. We discovered a kickback scheme involving $400,000 in stolen assessments. Using your documentation methods, we exposed the fraud and recovered full restitution for 200 families. The corrupt board members are now in state prison, and our community is finally free. Thank you for showing us that one person can make a difference. Letters like Maria's arrive weekly from across the country, families who used our proven strategies to expose corruption in their own communities. Each victory feels like another precision component in a machine designed to protect constitutional rights. The ripple effects continue expanding in ways I could never have imagined when I simply refused to let 2 trucks steal my parking space. Children who will never experience HOA harassment because corrupt boards now face federal prosecution. Elderly residents who can enjoy their gardens without fear of manufactured violations. Young families who can afford their homes because legitimate competition replaced monopoly pricing. 3 weeks ago, a young couple moved into Delilah's former mansion. They invited me over for coffee to thank me for liberating our neighborhood from tyranny. Their toddler played in the front yard where Delilah once supervised landscaping crews maintaining her image of suburban perfection. She'll grow up in a community where neighbors help neighbors instead of terrorizing them, the mother explained, watching her daughter chase butterflies without fear of violation notices. That freedom is your legacy. I sat in their kitchen, the same room where Delilah had probably plotted to steal my garage, drinking coffee with neighbors who represented hope instead of harassment. Sometimes the best revenge is building a world where the crime can't happen again. That evening, I returned to my garage for the daily ritual that reminds me why property rights matter. The concrete floor still shows faint oil stains from where Delilah's trucks had trespassed 2 years ago. Those stains are proof that refusing to be intimidated can trigger changes that protect thousands of families from similar intimidation. My father's truck sits exactly where it belongs, in the garage my family earned through honest work, protected by constitutional rights that no HOA Karen can steal.
You know, as this whole thing really just came down to this garage door lock. Federal prison for Delilah, millions recovered for victims, just because this one guy refused to let someone steal his parking space. That's how these HOA power trips work. They count on you getting emotional, maybe yelling, then just giving up. The whole system runs on people backing down when faced with official-looking paperwork and threats. But when you slow down, document everything, and actually spend time to see what the law says instead of what people tell you it says, that's when the power shifts fast. And do you know what's beautiful about this? Delia keeps meticulous records of her own crimes. Federal prosecutors said so files read like confessions. You can't make this stuff up. This stuff is happening everywhere in subdivisions. Someone's getting a bogus violation, being told he can't park in his own driveway. If you got an HOA story boiling in your neighborhood, drop it in the comments. And if this was helpful, hit like and subscribe for more. Because somewhere out there, someone just got their first violation notice, and they should know that door lock changed everything.